go today, I see people complain about stress. Work stress, relationship stress, traffic stress, and so on. In fact, I feel like some people are constantly always stressed and have grown accustomed to it. Wouldn't it be great, however, if stress was better managed? Welcome to Catholic Faith Forum. I'm May, and today we're going to be discussing how to deal with stress. I can't handle this topic alone, of course. I have a very, very, very interesting guest in the house, but I'm not going to let you meet him until we come back from this short break. Welcome back. This is Catholic Faith Forum. I'm May, and today we're discussing how to deal with stress. And I'm here with, in fact, I don't know how to introduce this person because he's been here before, and in fact, we killed the show. So we're planning to kill it again today. Mr. Chris Abojei, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, he's a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist, and he's here to share insights on stress. In fact, because me as a layman, I would just be talking about stress from a very layman angle, so that's why we have him in the house today. Welcome, happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, have you ever been stressed?
With that introduction, actually, I think I'm under stress already.
Are you serious?
Well, so yes, I have been stressed, and stress is a normal part of life, but it depends on how you take it.
That's why we have you here. Okay, so what is stress?
Well, by way of definition, we would say that, and I think you need to take note of this, that stress is a response to perceived threats. And I think the key thing there is the perceived, right? So it's the way you respond to a threat that is perceived. So it doesn't have to be a real threat. It just has to be something that you perceive.
In your mind.
Exactly. And so the way you respond to it could lead to stress.
Okay, so what causes the stress?
So like I said, from the psychological point, we'll just say, yes, it's the way you perceive this. But we like to also say that stress is actually supposed to be a survival mechanism. It's the body's way of trying to help you adapt, trying to help you survive.
Had enough.
Well, so it could be trying to tell you to run.
Okay.
You've had enough, you know what, escape from this. It could also be a way to tell you to fight back, you know, and that's where we have the fight or flight response, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just a way of telling you that something is not right, the pressure is too much, and then do something about it.
Okay, so can this stress be avoided, like completely avoided?
Yes, stress can be avoided, but completely avoided might not be possible because everywhere we go, there's one form of stress or the other. And while trying to avoid stress is something that we'll recommend, the other recommendation will be try to manage it, you know, because it's impossible to totally avoid stress. And so when you cannot totally avoid it, you try to manage it.
Okay, but you said it's perceived, how your mind perceives this as a threat, right? Okay, but what of when I'm working and I'm overworked and my bones are aching? Is that, I feel that is stress, but it's actually, I'm physically drained, so it's not just in my mind.
It's not just in your mind. However, so again, yes, that's when we now talk about the effects of stress. Stress could leave emotional effects, physical effects, and could even extend to social and spiritual, financial effects as well. But then it comes down to understanding that in the first instance, how did we get there? And so let me play around with your example and take us back to, say, primary school.
Okay.
So let's assume I enroll you in primary 6. Would you see that as stressful?
As a grown-up?
Yes, as a grown-up.
No, I would not.
Okay, but there was a time when that was stressful to you.
True. Because right now everything looks like ABC. You just go and just pass and fly through.
So what's the difference?
I've grown beyond that point, I would say. And now, so those things that I felt were stressful before are no longer stressful.
Exactly. So it comes down to your coping ability and the perception of, can I cope with this? So as long as you don't see this as something you can cope with, then it has an effect. And when you talked about the effect on the bones, on your body, it then comes down to what happens when we perceive threats. You know, what happens? And then that would help us understand that every time we perceive threat, like I mentioned, that the body tries to help us survive. The body tries to help us adapt to it. And by trying to adapt, what it does is that it initiates some chemical reactions in our body. So, for example, the secretion of a chemical called adrenaline or cortisol. These are stress hormones. Now, what they do is that they increase the metabolism in our body. You know, try to make sure that we're able to do things better. We're able able to breathe faster, have enough oxygen circulated, so that we can adapt effectively. Unfortunately, when these chemicals are secreted, in prolonged states, they cause effects on our body and they begin to harm us.
Okay.
And so the normal response first was to help us adapt, but when it becomes chronic, it becomes a problem.
Okay, so how do you tell when you're stressed? Like, how do I know that I'm stressed?
So for most people, you begin to look at it from the physical effects, headaches, body pains. And then when you start moving on to the psychological or emotional effects, irritability, they become easily irritable, they get angry easily, they cannot, sleep is affected, appetite is affected. And this is important because at the point, I said that we're trying to respond to something that is perceived as threat. If I'm pointing a gun at you, the last thing you'll be thinking about is food.
Definitely.
The last thing you'll be thinking about is sleep. And that's because so I'm going to
There's
try
an immediate threat.
Exactly. And the body responds by, again, secreting chemicals. And I'm going to try to save us from the biological jargons. But what happens at that point is that it shuts down the systems that it thinks you don't need at that point, because you need to save yourself, right? And so it tries to increase the rate at which the other systems that you need, for example, your heart needs to beat faster, your lungs need to breathe faster. All these things are things that you need. And so the ones you don't need, which is sleep, you don't want to be sleeping when a gun is pointed at your head. So sleep, appetite, some of this, even our immune system at that point, some of these things are shut down. And so when you find out that a person is exposed to prolonged stress, now you find out that those other areas, like sleep, for example, is affected. Is affected. So sleep is one area you need to look out to know, okay, I think I'm stressed. When you find it difficult going to bed or find it difficult staying asleep. Another area is your appetite as well. Are you overeating? Are you not eating enough? Headaches, pains, and some people even break down because the immune system is also affected. And so the tendency to get affected by illness becomes more at that particular state. And then the emotional issues that might come up as well, body pain, aches. Those are symptoms that you should look out for to tell you that, I think I am stressed.
I think I'm definitely stressed.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there a good and a bad type of stress?
Yes. So yes, they are good. So because a lot of us are void of the vocabularies to explain it. So when we say stress, a lot of people think, stress is negative.
Always.
But the truth is that stress is not always negative. In fact, there is the positive stress, which is the eustress. And what that does is that it creates a certain level of motivation. It gives us that push to want to do better, And so there's that positive stress. And there's the negative stress, which is the distress. And so that particular stress is the stress that we need to look out for, because that's the stress that affects our concentration, affects our work, affects our motivation, affects every other thing. The difference between these two comes down to your perception of being able to cope with them. And also maybe the duration, right? So usually eustress is for a short period of time. So you're exposed to stress for a short period.
Eustress, like?
It's spelled EUSTRESS.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So you feel like, I can cope with this. And so some people get excited by this. They get motivated by this. And then you see some people will say they feed off adrenaline.
Yes,
because
like for performers, entertainers.
Exactly,
that
for
when
entertainers.
You get on stage, that rush.
Exactly. That's a positive kind of stress. And like I said, it comes down to the duration. It's usually short-lived. And again, it also comes down to your perception of, I can do this, I can handle this. Which is different from the distress, where you feel, I can't handle this.
Spell the distress.
No, that's DISTRE.
Okay, like distress.
Yes, distress.
Oh, okay.
So you feel, I can't handle this. And the moment you perceive that, now it doesn't matter how big the threat is. What is most important is what you perceive about that threat.
Okay.
Right. So it could be a rat or something really small.
And then you scream down the house.
Do you get it? But it comes down to how much you think you can handle this. If you feel this is not something I can handle, then it affects you that much as well. So the other difference is that with the distress, it's not just short term as well. It could also be very long. And that's why we talk about chronic stress, meaning this is you being exposed to stress day in, day out, repeatedly for a period of time, a long period of time. And that tends to affect your body. Because after with the normal stress, after you're exposed to, in quote, that perceived threat, your body is able to go back to normal, right? So the chemicals are used up, the hormones are used up, and you're fine, you're doing well. But in this case, you find out that these chemicals are turned on, so they keep on being secreted. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, that some of the systems that the body feels are not needed at that point will be shut down. So you have that constantly being shut down. So your sleep is constantly being affected. And of course, we know that sleep is even needed for your health. So when sleep is affected, when appetite is affected, it affects your health in general, and then it can lead to other things as well.
So what are there different types of stress? Like people say I'm stressed emotionally, I'm stressed physically. So can you?
Yes. So we can get stressed by almost anything, right? Parenting stress, emotional stress, work stress, and in Lagos traffic stress. School stress. So even church stress as well, depending on the role you play in the church. Yeah. So you can get stressed by almost anything.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so what ways can we relieve stress? Okay, before you get to that question, when you kept explaining how your brain deciphers things in a certain way, is there a way my brain wouldn't? How do I explain this? Are there malfunctions? Like when I'm supposed to perceive this as a threat and I can't perceive this as a threat? Because I kept imagining that happening, and then there's a gun pointed to my head, and instead of me getting scared, I'm thinking of food. Does that happen?
Okay, so I've not heard of that case, right? But yes, I need to help us understand that when we talk about perception generally, it's a psychological concept. We need to be able to make a difference between the brain and the mind, right? A very good way to look at the brain is just an organ, right? And it's an organ that, just like a machine, has been programmed to do certain things, right? And so the brain keeps on trying to help you survive. Another way to look at the brain is to look at it from the place of an overprotective parent, right? So nothing against parents, actually. But the intention is right. That's where I'm going to. The intention is right. But the actions might not be right. And so that takes us to what the role of the mind is. The mind is basically an abstract representation of our experiences over time, right?
And say that again. I like that. I like the
So the mind is an abstract representation of our experiences over time. So what you've been exposed to over time, and again, what you've been taught over time, come to play with what your mind really is. And so the mind instructs the brain on what to do. So do this. And so where we need to really focus on is what the mind really is, because perception is seated in the mind. Exactly, it's seated in the mind. The mind can instruct the brain, oh, this is threat, respond. And the job of the brain is to just do that.
Do it.
Respond, because that's what it's meant to do. And so if the mind does not perceive this as threat, of course, it will also send that same signal, oh, this is not threat. Respond accordingly. And so maybe in the case of, I've not seen a case like that, a person who a gun is pointed at their head and they're thinking, you know what, I'm hungry right now. It could be that the mind doesn't perceive that as a threat. And yes, there could be a situation where you play around with this every time. You have a sibling where you guys just play around with guns. And so in this case, it doesn't see it as a threat.
Because it's like a normal thing.
It's a normal thing. It's something we do every time. And so at that point, it's not thinking of the fight or flight response. It's thinking, oh, it's a normal play. Another example is some of us used to play, they call it rough play, but we used to do this when we were younger. You probably just be walking and your brother is hiding at the back of the door and suddenly he jumps out to scare you. At that point, you see that there's a certain level of reaction you have. But the moment you know that, oh, this is my brother, there's a certain level of calm. And that gives you an idea. The mind sends the signal, danger, the brain responds, and then sends back the signal, oh, not danger, and it responds again. That's how it works, basically. And so when it comes down to how do we manage stress from a place of perception, it also comes down to you training your mind to see certain things as being you being able to handle them. Right? So you need to be able to train your mind over time that I can handle this, I can deal with this. It's not stressful. It's not something that would weigh me down. It's something I can deal with. The moment you are able to do this over time, you find that your level of response begins to change as well. The things that you will have perceived as really, really stressful begin to change. So it comes down to, can we retrain our mind to perceive things less stressful? Now, it doesn't mean that they might not be stressful to other people.
Yes, but
But
you've
it comes
trained.
down to you being able to say, okay, I can deal with this. I can manage this.
can
And so
handle it.
your initial panic response, your initial stress in quote response begins to change to something more healthy.
When I'm stressful, I'll start feeling, I'll have headache, and once I start having headache, I have to relax. I have to relax.
I don't really have a perfect answer for this, but the kind of work I do as a logistics specialist means that I'm exposed to a whole lot of stress in the course of my work. Um, so the period when I feel that I have overdone it, most times I just need to um, park somewhere, um, relax, drink water, sleep practically. Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just take a rest, and I'm fine.
Now, when I'm stressed, everything about me shuts down automatically. At that point, I won't be able to factor out solutions to maybe a problem at hand and anything. So once I'm stressed and I'm not able to think further, I'll shut down everything, take 5 or 10 minutes break, then I'll come back. I'll now come back and find solution to what I'm doing at that moment. Once I'm stressed, I shut down everything at that time.
When I start feeling dizzy, headache, my muscles aches, I know I'm stressed. So I take a cool sleep, a nap. Then alongside with music, music really helps when I'm stressed. So I just listen to cool music.
So you said we need to train our mind.
Yes.
How do we train our mind to change that perception?
Okay, so I would start by saying this, that the difference between a good day, a really good day, and a really bad day is not in what happened in the day,
It's in what?
how you perceive it.
Okay.
Right? So some people could have a really, in quotes, they have a really stressful day and then get back home and they're still excited about it. They're excited about, oh yes, I was able to go out and come back and I'm happy. And that's where gratitude comes in. So you're grateful for the fact that even though this is stressful, I was able to handle it. You'll find out that the way this person responds will be different from the way another person responds.
Yeah.
Maybe I should put this. There's a part in this Lagos I don't like going to, but I won't mention. Some of us already know. But let's assume someone asks me to come get, say, 10 million from that place.
You go there with all joy.
Excitement, with all excitement. So is it that the place changed? Did it become less stressful?
No, it did not.
What happened?
You have something you're looking forward to, so your mind is telling you, okay, this is something good.
Exactly. So let's turn that scenario around to a stressful job, right? And I like to tell people that when it comes to managing stress with things that seems inevitable, you can't take away from it. You can't avoid these things. For example, a stressful job, you need to be able to create a goal, something to look forward to. Create a plan. Say to yourself that, you know what, I'm doing this because I'm going somewhere else. And so you're going to job, not your work, not looking at it from, oh, this is a stressful work. You're looking at it from a place that this is a stepping stone to something else.
Something bigger.
And even though, yes, it's stressful, you're able to manage for that period of time. There's also the place of understanding how much you can take, right?
Very important.
You need to understand how much you can take. So while you're trying to learn how to manage stress from a different perception, you need to be able to watch your body and understand the effect on your body.
So you don't push yourself too hard.
Exactly, so you don't push yourself too hard. And that's where avoiding stress comes in. Learning to say no to certain things that can really stress you. Avoid stress. I have a simple formula to this. And I call it the A map, right? Where A stands for avoidance. Try to avoid anything that would cause stress to you. And this is something you learn from experience. From experience, you know that A, B, C, D, it can be stressful to me, so I want to try to avoid it, right? So maybe relationships, toxic relationships, traffic, for example. So one thing I do is if I want to go anywhere in Lagos, I'm looking at my Google map and checking where's the traffic.
Just
how
time yourself
can
and
I
calculate.
avoid it? So you want to try to avoid. That's one way. The other way is try to manage it, right? And managing stress has to do with you trying to modify your lifestyle. right? Modify your lifestyle. So something as exercise, for example, try to exercise frequently. Because what that does is that it helps your body adapt to situations like that. It prepares you, helps you cope better. You want to watch your food, the kind of your diet, the kind of food you take. You want to watch the relationships you keep. These are ways to manage it. You want to look at meditation, for example, deep breathing. I talked about gratitude,
Yes.
practicing gratitude. I recommend when you wake up in the morning and when you're going back to bed, because somehow it helps you see things differently. Rather than seeing it from a negative perspective, you want to see it more from a positive perspective. And that has a lot to do with the kind of chemicals that are secreted in our body. And the last AP, which is adapt by changing your perception. You adapt by changing. Now, that's a more long-term thing. And a simple concept around that is trying to make stress your friend. Right? So rather than seeing stress as something bad or something that's going to harm you, you want to see it as a friend, something that you can use for your own good. When I was in school, I used to use this for exam performance. I tell my friends that I feed off that energy, that stress in quotes. So I'm entering the exam all late because there's an adrenaline rush that comes in, and somehow it keeps me alert and helps me remember better.
That doesn't mean to work for everybody.
Exactly, it doesn't work for everybody. And so this also comes down to you understanding what works for you.
Yes.
Understand what works for you. In managing stress, what works for you might be hanging out with friends. For another person, that might not work with their personality. There are some people that they get drained when they're hanging out with friends. So some people get energized. But this comes to what your personality really is. Adapting by changing your perception comes down to you being able to see things differently from a more positive perspective. Create that positive narrative to, in quotes, every stressful event or experience that you have that positive narrative. There's always that positive narrative. It depends on who is looking. Journaling is another way to help you do that, because by the time you write down your experiences, you're able to see them from a third perspective, a third person's perspective. Have you wondered how you are almost the best advice giver, if there's anything like that? So when your friends come with their problems, you're able to give them the right advice. Do this. But when it's your turn to face that same problem,
you're just blocked.
Exactly. Why? Because when it's with your friends, you're a third person there. You're able to see something they're not able to see. So journaling helps you do that. You pour out everything. It also helps you express what we call catharsis, which is releasing the pent-up emotions. So you're able to put it down as a third person, third perspective, and see it differently. And create a narrative that helps you release the stress and also help you, adapt to the stress going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chris. I have so many more questions, like a lot of questions, but we can't take all of them today.
That's fine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Stress is almost inevitable in our daily life, but as he said, learn to manage it better, train your mind, and do better. Live each day deliberately and cut off any unnecessary stress, please. You only live once. Take care of yourself. Before we end today's show, we'll go for today's episode of Know Your Faith series. Stay with us.
Welcome to Know Your Faith series. I am Collins, and today we'll be discussing how to behave in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Now, the Blessed Sacrament is basically the body and blood of Christ. And so when we actually go out to our normal events, normal civic events, or you just find yourself in a certain location, there are certain ways to behave. The way you conduct yourself in school is quite different from the way you conduct yourself at home. So it's very, very important that we learn how to behave in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. First is that you need to retain perfect silence. I think it's very, very important. A whole lot of people sometimes, in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, have certain unnecessary discussions, and so many things that are not necessary begin to go on at that point. It's difficult, yes, but you are actually supposed to maintain perfect silence. Second is that no one is allowed to touch the monstrance or the lunar. I know that we always want to go and touch and then kiss or do the sign of the cross, because we feel that way our prayers have been answered, but not really. You don't have to touch the monstrance or the lunar, because Christ is actually present in the Blessed Sacrament. Even for the priests have to use a veil, like we talked about in previous episodes of KYF. Another is that you should not turn your back on the Blessed Sacrament. So when walking out of the chapel, you walk backwards, genuflect, and then you take your leave. Simple things like switching off your phone and other electrical devices, we know how tempting it can be. But once you are in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, switch off every other thing and just be present. Avoid unnecessary talks, conversations, and distractions. Avoid chewing gum. Once you're coming in, anything, whether you're eating or whatever it is you're eating, drop it outside of the chapel. Avoid chewing gum because you're in the presence of Christ. Christ is there with you. The best thing you could do is just be present there with him. So, like I said, the same way you conduct yourself when you go out for civic events, you're in a meeting, a conference, is likewise the same way you should conduct yourself when you're in the Blessed Sacrament. So there are certain things that you should and should not do. And I hope that from this episode, you've been able to get the necessary things that you should do and the ones that you should not do in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Very important to get more content like this. So till we meet again, be bold and be Catholic.
Welcome back. That was Know Your Faith series for today, and this is Catholic Faith Forum, and we've come to the end of today's show. Thank you very much, Mr. Chris.
Thank you
We're
for
definitely
having me.
bringing you back here because I didn't even ask half of the questions I have to ask, but thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. For questions or to continue this conversation, if you have suggestions, inquiries, anything at all that you want to reach us out about, follow us on our social media platforms at CFF on TV. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Dominican Media Presents for this episode and other episodes of the show, and you definitely enjoy yourself. Till next time, keep being saints in jeans and shirts.